Here we are. We have some fabulous people. We have an interesting docket. One particular item that excites me. Let me run from the top. We're going to talk about events. We're gonna review the All-In conference with Mads. We are going to talk about the new DeepMind release, the Mario Draghi commentary around the EU effectively and productivity and the challenges ahead, leading into what the UK needs to do. EU fines on big tech, Klarna's move away from Salesforce, and that is it. And today we've got Andrew Scott, who's one of my favorite humans. He's a ridiculously charming, thoughtful, and smart chap. He's a founder VC LP, having invested in hundreds of startups via his main day job at 7% Ventures. They focus on deep tech, frontier tech, and all of the cool stuff for founders building the future. He also runs several communities, including ICE, Dragon Chasers, and Allocate. Allocate and Dragon Chasers is more for collecting VCs and LPs, and ICE is a very founder-focused community. And one thing I didn't know about Andrew is he's a big creative head. He's into screen writing and producing, and he's a bit of a history buff. He's a dad with an 8-week-old. We've just learned he's a fabulous public speaker and an all-round good egg. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you. You set me up for the perfect call. Appreciate it.
There you go. Thanks for joining us today, Mads and myself, the usual cronies. So let's start at the top of the docket. Who's up first? So it's me, but really I'm going to reflect straight back to you, Andrew, because this is event. So this is your jam. This is something I've seen you do for many years fabulously well. And the question to the room is, for investors and founders, are events worth it? Andrew.
Depends what you want out of them. I think you always need a plan going to an event. And with my investor hat on, seeing founders bouncing around at every event is definitely a red flag. Even ourselves, we don't go to that many events. We're quite strategic. I don't think the best deal flow for a VC comes from events and actually meeting founders, because you run into a lot of those founders that bounce around at events, but also you see all the same founders that all the other VCs who are at the events see. So for us, events are a brand reach opportunity. What I mean about, know what your outcome is to be. Obviously, you should go with a plan. It's a great way of networking with a lot of people. If you've planned, if you can grab them, if you've planned in advance and you can be efficient. And of course, if you're some AI dev SaaS tool and the room is full of 2,000 AI dev developers, that's probably a great place to get on stage, probably even a great place to be. But I do think it's a bit like announcements on TechCrunch. I think often it's vanity, and founders should be careful about how they spend that currency. So we always say, like, TechCrunch article, okay, why now? What sort of plan is this part of? What do you want to get out of it? Is this the moment to do it, et cetera, et cetera?
I think that's fair. I was at Tech Barbecue in Copenhagen Tuesday, Wednesday this week. So Investor Day and then the first day of the main conference. I would hazard a guess that it's not quite doubled in size from the last time that I went 2 years ago, but it's add 50%. It's grown substantially. And my key learnings are aligned with yours. It's preload meetings with the people that you want to meet before you go. So set up everything around the event. And then the event is almost just a little bit of gravy. It's a little bit of like serendipity. It's a little bit of, I listened to that speaker or I bumped into that person. So there's a key learning is just preload everything. Don't rely on the event for the event. Just preload all of the meetings around it.
I mean, there's two caveats I'll probably give, which is it's probably biased by age, like being a bit longer in the tooth. I went to a lot of events when I was younger. That definitely helped build my network, and I've made some amazing connections through serendipity, be it in Swedish, saunas or Finnish saunas or...
Yeah, it's the wrong pod, dude. This is European tech, sorry.
Morning coffee in California, like whatever, right? One shouldn't underestimate serendipity for sure. And so having got a very established network, I suppose then see less value for the serendipitous side. I completely forgot what my other point was.
Mads, you are a new dad. You've just traveled. You are forgiven. While you're pondering, Mads, you've just come back from a mega conference. You just come back from the All-In Besties in LA, which I know that you love. And I know the speaker lineup is phenomenal. Tell us more. Tell us your highlights. Give us the lowdown.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was an extraordinary conference. And I'd say to Andrew's point, which I thought were all really well made, and I agree with fully, there's one more thing that I think you can get from a good conference, just one more thing, and that's inspiration. Many conferences, they don't have it because actually it's just kind of the same folks regurgitating the same stuff you know already. But the All In Summit had just an exceptional lineup. So Elon Musk was there, Sergey Brin, Mark Benioff, Peter Thiel, Michael Ovitz, and many, many more. And so, what were my takeaways? There's just a lot of that. So the Californian can-do attitude, kind of the ambition to take some really big swings. There are lots of different views that were on stage. I'll give an example of some of those in a minute. But overall, I would say it's just very, very inspirational to me. And I think that's the way a good conference is meant to be. Because it also means every time you then funnel out of the conference hall, right, you've had another good talk, all those conversations that you then have with folks from all over the world, immediately there's something cool to talk about. And that is then such a good catalyst for making some of those serendipitous connections that Andrew spoke about. But what were some of the highlights? So, seeing Sergey Brin come on stage, he wasn't pre-announced. It was sort of a last minute thing. It was a surprise for us. He talked about how he was back in the lab full time. So practically have come out of retirement, kind of one of the richest people in the world. He doesn't need to work a day in his life. He sees AI as the biggest shift, absolutely an opportunity in our lifetime. And it's interesting to hear him say that he felt that even kind of the Google engineers who are building this stuff, they're not using AI enough. He was so big on it and so bullish. And he's a fairly laid back guy, as folks that know him will know. So it was really interesting to hear him kind of emphasize this. We also had Nikesh Arora from Palo Alto Networks, who was talking about kind of another side of what LLMs are disrupting. And he was talking about consumer-facing apps. Sort of, some of these apps we use every day, OpenTable, Booking.com, Hotels.com, all the stuff we use for travels. And he's like, look, LLMs can take this whole ecosystem entirely apart. We're not far off. The LLMs just going straight to the API and creating the trip for you, booking the restaurants, booking the hotel, booking the flights. That's going to be disruptive in a major way. But what he also said was, look, there are huge security risks because in many ways, they're still quite easy to hack. So that was interesting. There are clearly new opportunities, new threats, which again lead to new opportunities, of course, for everybody on the investor side. Contrasting that with Mark Benioff from Salesforce, for him, AI is all about the enterprise. And they are basically building agents into everything. So their new platform is called Agent Force. And everything is an agent, not necessarily a customer service agent, but agents connecting to other agents operating autonomously. That's the whole new Salesforce architecture. So very interesting to hear his vision and how that's unfolding there. Kind of another one, I was talking about some of the different perspectives, different visions. So Elon Musk was talking about robots, and kind of he is betting on humanoid robots becoming kind of the dominant form of robots. He says they'll be pervasive, they'll be super easy to build, and it'll be super easy to use because the world is already designed for humans, right? It's kind of, so you make robots that look like us and they will work really well. But then on the other hand, you had Jake Luzararian from Gecko Robotics, and he showed how in our world of infrastructure, of roads, of bridges, of ships, of refineries, these are actually places where it's really hard for people to move around and assess and repair. And he showed they've created dozens of specialized robots that can automate all of this often dangerous work. And they built an incredible business out of it. It's a really, really, just an incredible founder. So that was fascinating. Just a final thing to lead on with, kind of the EV, there was kind of a electrical vehicle aviation or electrical aviation panel with founders from Wisk, from Archer, and from Joby. And they were basically talking about how they see some of these EV taxis take off in less than 2 years. And they basically said, look, the tech is there. We're just waiting for the regulators. And they say that that's the main barrier. And therefore, the first places where this will be put into production will probably be outside of the US. It'll probably be in the Gulf. But again, this was a little bit closer than I think many of us realize. And I just, Peter Thiel, who was also there, has been talking about flying cars. Well, guys, this is flying cars, they're coming, and they're probably a lot closer than we think. So yeah, just lots of inspirational stuff.
When I was a kid, I remember it was all eating silver pills and flying cars. I mean, that's what 1980 was supposed to look like.
Now they're here.
Did you? Andrew, did you remember what you wanted to catch up on?
I think the inspiration is also a great point. I agree with Mads. We so often now working remotely, we tend to work in a silo.
Yeah.
If you do work remotely a lot, and there's nothing like mixing a room with people who share a fellow passion, right, to spur you on. And I think we need that human contact. There's no question.
No, I agree. The only challenge I have with that piece is the kinds of people and the kinds of characters that are there to inspire you. And this is always a double-edged conversation, and it's quite a difficult conversation to have. But when you've got Elon Musk backing characters like Trump, and the way that he uses his megaphone of X to just be an unpleasant human being, I have a real personal challenge with the kinds of characters that are on stage inspiring you. And I know that obviously Thiel invited JD Vance to come and do a talk at the All In conference, and some of the right-wing views, or some of the extreme views, forget right-wing, left-wing. So the question I have for both of you is, does it matter? Should politics even be part of the conversation when it comes to this inspiration piece, or the people that are leading and driving our world? Andrew, what do you think?
I think in personal relationships, you want to be aligned with you want to be with someone who's aligned with your values. But I think in business, or indeed in politics, it's a bit naive to think you're going to be able to vote for someone or work with someone who agrees with everything you agree with. And when you look at the impact that Elon is having, long-term positive potential for the planet, I give him quite a lot of latitude on his political views. Doesn't mean I agree with them. Doesn't mean I think he's made smart decisions on how he's using the soapbox he has. And sometimes I'm disappointed by him. But what are we to do? Are we to try and discount the guy, or put friction in the way of his greater mission, which is to decarbonize mobility and the wider industry, or put friction in the way of making us a two-planetary species? I think there's some pragmatism needed here, and he's all for free speech, so let's argue him into a corner and undermine his arguments. Like, that's the point of democracy, right?
Yeah, fair comment. Mads, anything to add there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we should be careful. We're not so sensitive that we can't be around folks that have other views than us. It's interesting. So I brought out a couple of people I mentioned, Elon Musk, Sergey Brin, Mark Benioff, and Peter Thiel. And immediately folks are saying, oh, right wing. Well, it turns out of those four names, two have been donating to Republicans and two have been donating to Democrats. But it's almost like if there's one person or one view in the mix that folks don't like, everybody gets so sensitive around it. Whereas actually, I think, isn't it much more about just getting a plurality of views and having a discussion and bringing it all in? And then, as Andrew says so correctly, addressing those arguments and those views we don't like head on, rather than sort of trying to cancel folks and just say, we don't want to hear what you have to say. I think one thing that's important for me is, and it's less so maybe in Europe, but certainly in the US political discourse, there's just far too much money involved. I think that's maybe the bigger problem. I think you shouldn't have such a big megaphone just because you have money, and so some of these huge donations just seem odd, right? And you know how much in Congress, how dependent the whole system is on political donations. So in my view, that's a bigger problem. But yeah, people having views, I think, is fine. Let's discuss, let's argue. Yeah. And sometimes there can be folks that come from another corner or another part and maybe have another starting point that we do, but they might have a point. And maybe that point isn't the right one to begin with, but it still inspires in some way. And in shaping our counter argument, we will harness our own and we will become smarter. And for me, as Andrew says, I think that's so much of what democracy is about.
No, I think it's fair. I'm offended by the extremities, and I'm offended by the tribal nature. This two-party tribalism, it just doesn't work. And when you have these extreme views espoused, it's so divisive. Anyway, way too political. Let's get back into Google and DeepMind and Alpha Proteo. Is that how you say it? Alpha Proteo? I have no idea. Mads, this is yours. So this is their first AI system for designing novel high-strength protein binders to serve as building blocks for biological and health research. This is a big deal. What's cooking?
Yeah, look, so take a step back. So proteins, what are they? I mean, they're complex cells that serve both as building blocks in our bodies, but also as tools for our cells and as workers that can carry out certain functions. And when cells mutate, they can become cancerous, they can hijack the proteins, and they can start using them to metastasize, which is what happens when cancer grows and spreads. And so one of the ways we can address cancer is to develop instruments that can stop these rogue proteins. And these are the protein binders. And so as a protein binder is a molecule that binds to the original protein, and that can stop it from doing something we don't want it to do, like enabling cancer to spread. And so because proteins are complex, it can be tricky to find the binders that fit these proteins correctly. And we know Google has been doing some incredible research, or Google DeepMind in particular, around AlphaFold, which was a new way to figure out how these proteins fold. And they've then used and leveraged that insight and that research to help figure out how we can find and identify these protein binders. And that's exactly what it does. So it's still very early days. The white paper that's gone out now has reported experimental success rates of 300 to 300 times better binding affinities than the previous best methods. So it's potentially, as you say, could be a big deal. Now, it's only the beginning. Even if we find a protein binder, we still need to find ways to make sure that we can deliver the right dose at the right time. Medical research has so many complexities. But for me, the reason I thought this was so exciting is this is a real way in which AI is advancing our medical research capabilities right now, today. And so when we talk about when is AI really going to have an impact, well, right there in that white paper is AI having potentially a huge impact. So I thought that was a very exciting thing to share.
Will this mean anything for the European ecosystem specifically? Will this open up any more startup opportunities, investment opportunities, or is this kind of a solo DeepMind Google thing? Is there anything that we can bake around this, do you think? I don't know how this is going to work out.
Well, lots of work now needs to go into figuring out how we can take these. First of all, you have a new capability that can enable you to develop and identify these new protein binders, but then you need to develop drugs from that.
Andrew, you invest in founders building the future, to use your own vernacular. So can you see anything in this? Maybe give a quick kind of synopsis of the kind of stuff that you invest in, the kind of stuff that gets you out of bed.
Yeah, actually life science isn't an area of expertise, and one of the things we do very little in. We've had to watch many of the AI drug discovery startups sort of go by the wayside just because we invest in health and digital health. And if it's majority digital driven, so it's AI driven, we can do it. But if it's a large part of it is pharma related, we just don't have the experience in the team to cover it. So I think it's a fascinating space. I think that as with anything that AI touches, it's an opportunity for a step change in outcomes and sort of democratizes to some degree the opportunities against the big pharma companies. So we've backed some of the stuff, which is the picks and shovels. If you look at Chemastery, who are using AI and robotics to mean that a chemist never has to do the same process again. They do them once and it learns and it then reproduces that exact same compound over and over and over again. So it's super exciting, like most areas that are being impacted by the sort of cost reduction in hardware and the increase in compute power.
Yeah, that leads us very nicely onto our next kind of that efficiency, productivity, and obviously we're seeing it in health, pharma, and there's going to be some massive inroads into drug discoveries and vaccines and all of those health-related products and services, which are going to be massive. But Mario Draghi, the ex-Italian PM and ex-president of the ECB, was talking at the EU, and he's just released the paper, The Future of European Competitiveness. Now, Mads and I talk about productivity and efficiency across Europe a lot. We're a bit of a broken record on the topic, but it's just a massive thing. If we don't correct the change, we cannot have the welfare, healthcare, roads, infrastructure, defense budget that we all need and want. And so this is a massive, massive deal. And he's a really interesting character. I loved hearing him. And the Bloomberg headline is, the EU has reached a point where without action, it will have to compromise its welfare, the environment, or its freedom. And then Politico going into, the EU is hampered by badly designed financial markets, energy is too expensive, R&D is haphazard and split among too many countries. It's increasingly polarized politics, making agreement on anything as frustrating and as painful as pulling teeth. So there's loads of headlines, loads of stories around his talk and his paper. And his key themes are, he wants to see a massive investment boost. He's talking about 800 billion a year, I think. He wants to see better management of energy in the decarbonisation efforts. He wants to see us close the innovation gap, reduce dependencies, fully implement the single market, and really work on this skills and social inclusion. Because if we don't pull society together rather than being divisive, then we have a massive problem. Mads, I know we talk about this. This is a massive topic for you. What's on your mind around this for us?
Look, as you say, Mario Draghi is really interesting to listen to. He's not mincing any words. I think it's refreshing to hear somebody outline the problem so eloquently and so clearly. I thought the report was well written and it's welcome. There are so many ways to look at this, but I keep coming back to kind of this balkanization of Europe. To be the best Europe can be, we need to bring all of us together. One of the things he highlighted is that by some measures, Europe doesn't have, or the EU doesn't have any of the world's top science clusters. It turns out that Europe's top science clusters are outside the EU. It's in the UK and Switzerland. Nuts, right? It's not good for us and it's not good for them. Imagine the US economy without California, right? Imagine that was a different country. But the UK is not California. But excepting the weather, it is the most Californian part of Europe. And so, of course, we'd be better off, and they'd be better off if we were all together. If we could, use the UK for its strengths commercially and research-wise, if we can use the European market and we can collaborate in that way. And so I think a lot of the things he talks about they're well meant, but I think without getting more UK-EU collaboration, it's going to be hard to really go the last mile. It's like trying to fight with one arm tied behind your back.
Andrew, you live in Portugal. You do deals across Europe. You have I think your partner's in the Bay. So you are a well-traveled global European traveling Wilbury. What do you hear down in Portugal? What's the connective tissue across Europe that you kind of are plugged into? Do you know anything or have any insights into what's happening? Shifts in regulation or changes in policy? Because I love how this guy's talking, and he's 77 now. He's got no axe to grind. He just wants to tell it like it is. I think he did his talk on his 77th birthday, so good for him and get out there. But Andrew, how do you see the European challenge converse opportunity?
Wow, how long have we got?
Sorry about that. That was a big foot in the door, that one. Sorry.
I split my time in Lisbon, London, so sort of get to taste firsthand kind of both flavors, I suppose, to some degree. I thought the article was really interesting, but nothing hasn't been said before. I mean, one of the bullet points stood out particularly as great corporate speak, which was close the innovation gap. I mean, I must have heard that since I was in my teens. I've always had a healthy interest in current affairs and closing the innovation gap is, I grew up in Cambridge in England, and for years they nicknamed themselves Silicon Fen, which I always thought was a bit of a joke. There were some fundamental structural reasons why Europe and the UK are struggling, both economically, I think, but to embrace this next wave of innovation around AI and robotics and everything else. Some of those are political, but some of those are cultural. And I think we do have a real scarcity mentality problem in Europe, but also in the UK. And you see that reflected day to day in how many investors invest, but certainly in how politicians make the rules and regulations we have to operate within. He touches on a bunch of different areas, including decarbonisation. I think that's a great example. Like, if you want a leading green tech industry, you impose the tightest restrictions to force the market to respond to that demand. You don't put the loosest restrictions in. And so in the UK, I'm still a UK national, I'm very frustrated that we don't just impose the tightest constraints on the end of petrol cars, because the politician's view is, and of course all the incumbent lobby of anybody who cares about gasoline, is that this will crush the economy and this will increase the cost of living and make doing business harder. When in actual fact, what will happen is you'll end up with the most advanced green tech industry, and you'll build an industry because this is where the market demand UK will be where the market demand is. And suddenly you're in a position where, in Europe anyway, you have then a bunch of companies that will then be at the forefront of serving all the other economies when they catch up, when they put in the same regulatory constraints. So there's a lack of strategic understanding and strategic thinking at government level for sure. And strategy by its definition is long term, but politics these days act more and more like CEOs responding to quarterly reports on public markets. Short termism. They wax and wane according to what the polling says. So I always laugh when governments come out with a strategy because it lasts sort of 6 months and half of it doesn't get implemented. And you see this with the new Labour government in the UK. They're going on and on about how they want to be at the forefront of UK as an AI superpower. Yet the first thing they do when they come to government is cancel the $1 billion budget for the new supercomputer, which would be 50 times faster than any computer in the UK, and which Edinburgh University has already spent £30 million on a building for, and they've cancelled it. And it's a political decision. And if it's not a political decision, then they really are just stupid. Because even 6 month delay has an exponential knock-on effect of everything else that trickles down from access to that compute power. So there's just, as so often, a complete disconnect between what the politicians in Brussels or the politicians in London say they want and the strategies and the regulatory frameworks that they implement. There are some most basic of changes which, us as VCs run into every day. And I'm talking about just compliance around raising a VC fund, for example. If you're in the US, up to I think it's a $250 million fund, I'm sure someone will correct me, you can go out and raise money from anybody, and you have to KYC them. You have to find they're a professional investor at the point at which they give you money. What do you have to do in the UK? In the UK, you're supposed to get someone to sign a bit of paper and to KYC them before you even talk about your fund to them, which is the equivalent of saying to someone, you walk into a kitchen, but you've got a kitchen shop selling sharp knives, and before the person walks through the door, you go, right, can you fill in this form in order to confirm that you're sane enough to come into my shop, not pick up a knife and stab yourself in the heart with it? And that is the regulatory framework under which tech in the EU and the UK is operating. Yes, and this is one very small thing, but imagine the friction that is involved for anybody raising a fund and the cost compared to the market that everyone is competing against, which is the US, where I can just send, as a US fund, you can send the deck to anyone. Nobody cares. My problem is that governments are naive that regulation is set by the winners in this industry. And there's nothing Google or Facebook likes more than regulatory capture to protect their industry, firstly. The second thing is that when the government does have an opportunity to regulate, they don't do it. And I'm thinking, easiest example in the UK would be water companies. Water companies have a monopoly, they're private companies. Why are they paying dividends and profits out when they're poisoning our waterways every single day? There are really simple decisions that could be made, and it's a lack of leadership.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, and I can think of at least another 10 examples. But I was reading the IMF paper, it's the Finance and Development paper, and I was really intrigued as to what they think would be the answer to some of these regulatory and productivity pushes and efficiency gains pushes, and kind of setting the scene for how policy can be set. And they came up with some really just like kind of a bit like the aspects that you mentioned, Andrew, some really loose things that don't really make sense, or how do you action that thing? Like shift resources from less productive firms to more productive ones. Like how the heck do you do that? Economic policy should focus on smaller, younger firms. Larger incumbents focus on protecting market share rather than fostering innovation. Fine. What's the answer to that? Provide tax credits and grants for early stage innovation. Great. What does that look like? Reduce barriers to entry for new players. So I kept reading these lists in this report again. And what do you think? You're a bunch of smart people, and we never quite got there.
It's all corporate speak, isn't it? And I mean, it
feels almost like it's just like it's like, let me just write down the most obvious thing that I can think of that's been hackneyed around for the last 10 years and complete the report. It's like, just give me something, man. Woman.
I think grants is another great example, right? Why do governments give out grants? Grants should be the purview of universities and genuinely solving unknowns in science. Small companies should not be given grants; they should be given contracts to deliver something. The government should give out contracts to companies to deliver X, Y, Z by a certain date, and that forces the company to behave commercially. It forces them to build a product and not become just an R&D shop, which is not what startups should be. So it's exceptionally frustrating, and it's hard to unpick how much of it is just people who aren't smart enough, and how much of it is inertia and sort of incumbent behavior, and how much of it is outside lobby pressure that prevents these decisions. There's other things I'd love to touch on very quickly. One is the UK the NHS in the UK just rejected a contract for an AI product which is proven, because it's been tested in the NHS, to reduce breast cancer deaths by up to 15% by working as a companion to radiologists. The government's just decided not to roll that out, not because they're choosing a different company to do it, but because they're under pressure from clinicians not to roll out AI, which actually goes against the Hippocratic Oath. And the second thing is just the most basic commercial sense. Another one, great one, would be spaceports in the UK. Instead of we don't have any spaceports actually. It's a proper vertical launch spaceport.
We have Cornwall spaceport.
And instead of focusing on, well, should we get one working first? Let's get one working, and maybe we should actually build one which could capture some of the cash that's going into space launch, because the UK is brilliantly positioned for polar orbit, and actually all the money, like 99% of the money, is in medium to heavy launch, not this light sub 400 kilogram launch. So what does the UK do? The UK spends like 10 years saying, oh, we're going to have multiple spaceports, and rolls out like licenses very slowly, it's like 4 or 5 places, and the tiny bit of money, literally a few £1 million, it spreads out across all these sites. Because there's a political agenda to do that, to like say, oh, Cornwall's got a bit, and Scotland's got a bit, and this has got a bit, instead of actually going, what is the goal, and what's the shortest path to get there? Well, maybe we need one spaceport that actually fucking works to start with. So let's put all the money there, pick the best site, and when we've got one, we can think about a second one.
That we are sounding like 3 grumpy old men.
We are.
So
let's just embrace it.
Don't give it the game away.
The all-in guys, it's worked really well for them. So yeah. I mean,
except we need to get a bit more political. I'm very conscious of time. There's one thing that I was really intrigued by, and I'd love your thoughts on. So the CEO of Klarna has just sacked off Salesforce and Workday, 2 of their big SaaS provisions in the business, citing AI as the solution to boost revenue, I think, per employee by 75%, and they're looking at a 25% reduction in marketing spend. And Sebastian, I am never going to pronounce his surname, is looking at AI to solve these challenges within the organization. So my question to you both is, are we going to see more large organizations sack off their SaaS products, whatever they may be, to bring in-house, to build agentic workflows, to use AI to replace the services that they're paying as SaaS solutions? Mads, do you want to kick this one off?
Yes, I think the short answer is yes, we will. I think the main reason is that the market is in flux. Many of the things we used SaaS to do, to create a standardized way to process a workflow, there could be completely upended by LLMs, by what's happening today. And so when you have things in flux, the new products, the new platforms are not there yet. Klarna is a sophisticated organization like Spotify, like other really sophisticated companies that are right on the leading edge of what technology can do. And it probably makes more sense for them to go and develop their own platform than to wait for the market to catch up. But I also do think that there will be a huge market for companies that are less sophisticated to buy things off the shelf from a Salesforce. And as we spoke about earlier, Mark Benioff is all over this and is creating Agentforce to do and address and attack exactly the same problem. So I think what we're seeing is a real upheaval of the industry. It's not going to be business as usual. It's not just going to be take yesterday and forecast that forward. There'll be winners, there'll be losers, some big, some small. So yes, it's all for the taking, which is part of what's so exciting right now.
Well, I think the rate of change is going to be quite rapid as well. Andrew, what's your take?
Massively so.
Yes, short answer. I mean, to see this as the, if we think back from sort of doing things manually to bespoke software, and then bespoke software to desktop software, and then we see a big shift from desktop software to cloud SaaS. And now we're seeing cloud SaaS shift to AI agents, but we're super early in this curve, and some companies are still using that bespoke software, right? So there's this long tail, and it's, to your point, I think it's fascinating to see how the value chain within AI will pan out. I think there's going to be an absolute bloodbath for a lot of generative AI companies because I think they've all jumped too soon. We saw this even last year. The last year I must have seen, or 24 months, seen at least 10 live translation startups, and they're all going to go by the wayside, and many of them already have, because naturally the existing technology stack of the incumbents like OpenAI will be able to, and Google and others will be able to do that well. So it's unclear to what degree these big LLMs are similar to, Amazon Cloud as a provider, and are actually the consumer-facing solution or business-facing solution that businesses will use. And to me, it starts to look more like it'll be the latter, because Amazon needs people to host stuff on their sites and services. OpenAI doesn't. They just need users, and those users don't need to be intermediary B2B companies who are selling to the end user. And we've seen this before, right? I don't know if you remember Open Graph on Facebook. Whole raft of companies were built on the Open Graph, and overnight they just shut it down. We saw the same with Twitter. So if it does go that way eventually, this will be a far greater bloodbath than either of those two platforms were. So we'll see.
Well, you guys rock. We've run out of time. Love you both dearly. Thank you, Andrew, for your time. I know you're exhausted with babies and travel. You are awesome. Mads, delicious, delightful. I'll catch you next week.
Loving
Pleasure was all
you.
mine.
See you soon. Bye.
Ciao, ciao.